They thought humiliation would be the final memory stamped onto Elliot and Adrian Carter's lives. The brothers stood in the grand hall of their father's estate, the chandeliers glittering coldly above them, as relatives whispered in the shadows. This was not just a funeral, it was a public stage for cruelty. Their father, a man who had built Carter Floral from a tiny corner shop into a chain known across the state, had been lowered into the ground only hours earlier. But instead of mourning, the family gathered now to divide his legacy like vultures circling a carcass. Elliot, quiet and reserved, carried himself with the composure of someone who had spent years keeping his truth hidden in plain sight. His twin, Adrien, wore his pride like a badge, his rainbow pin gleaming against the black suit he had borrowed. Two men cut from the same cloth, yet one cautious, one unafraid to be seen. Both were sons of the same father, the man who had once said to them, "If ever the world takes everything from you, remember what I leave behind. One thing will save you." They never understood what he meant until today. The executor of the will cleared his throat, but before the words could find gravity, laughter filled the room. A cousin smirked and muttered loudly enough for the front rows to hear, "Why bother? The faggots don't get a cent." The cruelty was not hidden. It was celebrated. And when the envelope was finally opened, when the polished voice of the lawyer read their names, the entire hall leaned forward, expecting a spectacle. What Elliot and Adrian received was not the chain of stores, not the mansion, not even a modest account. It was a set of rusted keys. Keys to a van parked at the edge of the estate, a vehicle so old its paint had long since given way to patches of brown decay. The executor's words cut through the silence. "This, gentlemen, is all your father left you." The room erupted in laughter. Their aunt covered her mouth with a lace handkerchief, pretending to wipe tears while smirking. An uncle leaned back and declared, "That's all they deserve. Deviants don't belong in this family business." Others nodded, the weight of tradition and prejudice louder than the eulogies spoken hours earlier. Adrian's hand trembled as he clutched the keys, his cheeks burning. Elliot placed a steadying hand on his brother's arm, not to comfort, but to keep him from collapsing under the weight of betrayal. Together they walked out, every pair of eyes tracking them as though they were intruders at their own father's farewell. Behind them, the mansion's doors slammed shut, sealing them out of the only home they had ever known. On the driveway, the van stood like a wounded beast, its windows fogged, its body corroded, its tires sighing under years of neglect. It looked more like junk than inheritance, yet it was all they had. The Carter brothers, who had once dreamed of inheriting fields of flowers and a legacy of beauty, were now left with nothing but a derelict shell and a storm of voices mocking their very existence. As the sun dipped low, Elliot turned the keys in his hand and whispered to himself, not for Adrien to hear, but to steady his own breaking heart. He must have had a reason. Father was never careless, but faith was hard to hold when cruelty had the final word. They climbed into the van, its seats cracked, its air stale with dust. The silence between them was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of two men trying to stitch together dignity from the scraps of ruin. That night, as the laughter of their relatives still echoed in memory, they realized they were not just orphans of a father. They had been orphaned from an entire family. No inheritance, no home, no welcome. Just a rusted van and the shadows of betrayal. Yet within the ashes of that night, a spark remained. It was faint, fragile, but alive, because their father had once spoken of a secret, and sometimes what looks worthless on the outside carries a weight the world cannot measure. This was only the beginning of their story. If you are hearing this for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to Heart Story, where stories of pain, resilience, and hidden treasures remind us that life's greatest inheritance is not always gold or land. It is the courage to rise when the world tries to bury you. And perhaps the quiet lesson here, even in this moment of rejection, is that being true to who you are will always cost something. But what it gives back, when the time is right, is beyond anything the mockers could ever imagine. The first nights inside the van felt like exile carved into steel. Elliot and Adrian Carter sat on the torn seats, staring at the cracked ceiling lined with mildew stains. Rainwater seeped in through rusted seams, dripping softly onto the floor. The vehicle smelled of dust, of leather long decayed, of a life left behind. It was no home, yet it became the only space they could claim as their own. Elliot rose before dawn, forcing himself into the rhythm of survival. He found odd jobs at the local flower market, lifting crates, sweeping walkways, and delivering bouquets for shop owners who barely glanced at him. His hands, once soft from school notebooks and piano lessons, blistered and split under the grind. He returned each evening carrying coins that rattled inside his pocket, too few to buy more than bread or apples past their prime. But the routine gave him purpose, a way to feel he was holding on to something solid, however fragile. Adrien lived by different hours. When the sun dipped and the market grew quiet, he walked the street corners with his battered guitar, its strings uneven and its wood scarred. He sang beneath the hum of neon lights, his voice weaving through the night air with sorrow and defiance. Passers-by sometimes tossed coins. Others sneered. He heard their mutters, words sharp as broken glass. Disgrace? His father built an empire, and look at him now. Whispers followed them everywhere. Vendors gossiped as Elliot carried boxes through the stalls. A woman clutched her child's hand tighter, murmuring that the Carter brothers were cursed. At night, when Adrien returned with little more than a handful of change, they sat together in the van, their backs pressed against the cold metal, their future unclear. But in those nights of emptiness, something endured. When frost bit through the van's broken windows and their breath fogged the air, Adrien would tune the guitar softly, and Elliot would hum. Their songs were not loud, not meant to impress. They were threads of memory, woven from the past when their father read poetry in the garden and taught them to hear music in silence. The world outside could spit its scorn, but inside that decaying van, two voices blended into one fragile harmony. In the quiet hours, Elliot often recalled his father's words, "If one day you lose everything, remember the van, it will save you." At the time, the phrase felt like riddles meant for another lifetime. Now it became a mantra, a whisper in the dark that kept despair from devouring them. Adrien, though restless and bruised by rejection, clung to it too, though he rarely admitted it aloud. They endured hunger, nights of trembling when the wind rattled the frame, mornings when condensation dripped onto their blankets. Yet even in the lowest moments, when Elliot's hands shook from exhaustion and Adrien's voice cracked under cold air, they learned something neither the mansion nor the inheritance could have taught. The measure of their worth was not written in bank accounts or property deeds. It was carved into resilience, into the choice to wake each morning and still stand. What the world saw was two discarded sons, banished to a van unworthy of the Carter name. But what grew in those nights was a quiet defiance, a bond that sharpened instead of broke, and a discipline forged not in privilege but in survival. By living inside that van, mocked and invisible, they began to learn what their father had always hinted sometimes. The greatest wealth does not reveal itself in what you are given, but in what you discover about yourself when everything else is stripped away. The days blurred together in the van, each sunrise painting rust into deeper shades of orange, each night closing around the brothers with the same dull ache of hunger and fatigue. Elliot scrubbed his hands raw at the flower market, and Adrien strummed his guitar to strangers who rarely listened. Yet even in their exhaustion, they clung to their father's words, as if the old man's voice still lingered somewhere between the steel walls of their inheritance. It was during one of Adrien's restless afternoons, when the market was empty and Elliot had gone to deliver flowers, that the discovery came. Adrien had taken a rag and dipped it in soapy water, determined to wipe away the grime that clung to the van's interior. It was not out of pride, but out of desperation to carve a little dignity out of decay. As he scrubbed the corner of a panel near the door, the fabric snagged, catching on a jagged edge. With a frustrated pull, a flake of rust cracked loose. What glimmered beneath stopped him cold. In the thin shaft of sunlight cutting through the dusty window, The exposed surface gleamed not the dull silver of ordinary steel, but a warm, impossible glow. Golden. Adrien froze, his breath trapped in his chest, and pressed the rag harder. More flakes fell away, revealing a vein of radiant metal, untouched by years of weather. His heart pounded so violently it drowned out every sound of the street beyond. When Elliot returned that evening, his shirt stained with pollen and sweat, he found his brother crouched at the threshold, trembling hands brushing away fragments of rust. The panel now bore a streak of unmistakable brightness. Adrien's eyes were wide, wild with disbelief. He whispered, his voice breaking, "It's gold. Elliot." The van isn't what it seems. Elliot's knees weakened. He reached out, touched the glowing patch, and felt the cold, solid weight beneath his fingertips. This was not paint, not trickery. Their father had hidden something extraordinary. Memories surged back nights when the old man tinkered in the garage, when he refused to let mechanics touch the van, when he said it was more valuable than anyone realized. At the time, they had laughed it off as sentiment. Now the truth unfolded before them, undeniable and terrifying. Adrien wanted to shout, to run into the street and proclaim their fortune, but Elliot gripped his brother's wrist, his eyes fierce, his voice low. "Not a word. Gold saves no one if the world knows where it lies. We protect it, we use it wisely, or we lose everything." The brothers sat in silence, the weight of revelation heavier than any poverty they had endured. Around them, the van looked the same to passers-by, rusted, worthless, a shell of neglect. But to them, it had become a vault, a hidden testament of their father's faith in them. They understood now he had not trusted the family with his empire. He had trusted them with something purer, something shielded by disguise. Adrien ran his fingers across the glowing seam and whispered, "He must have known they would betray us." Elliot nodded, recalling the steady tone of their father's warnings. This was not merely inheritance. It was a test. The discovery did not erase their hunger or mend their exhaustion. It did not instantly lift them from the shadows of humiliation. What it gave them instead was a seed of possibility, a reason to endure another day in the van. It reminded them that appearances deceive, that what looks broken can hold unimaginable value, and that silence sometimes preserves more than noise ever could. As the evening settled, Elliot leaned back against the door, his mind racing not with dreams of wealth, but with caution. Gold could ignite greed as quickly as it could rescue lives. Their survival would depend not only on what they had found, but on how they carried it forward. And perhaps that was the lesson hidden beneath the rust. True worth is often veiled, waiting for patient eyes to see it. It is not the glitter on the surface, but the strength beneath that defines value. The secret of the golden van became a silent pact between Elliot and Adrien Carter. In the stillness of night, while the city slept, they chipped away discreetly at small fragments of the hidden treasure. Each sliver of gold, sold quietly to trusted buyers, became seed money, never enough to draw attention, always enough to take one careful step forward. What once seemed like an endless sentence of rust and rejection slowly turned into a ladder of escape. Elliot was the first to act. With steady hands and a vision sharpened by hardship, he rented a modest corner shop on a quiet street. The place was humble, bare walls, a cracked floor, windows clouded with age, but he filled it with color. Buckets of roses, tulips, lilies, and wildflowers lined the shelves. He arranged them not only by hue, but by meaning, crafting displays that spoke of hope, reconciliation, and pride. Unlike the Carter floral shops that prized uniformity and tradition, Elliot's store felt alive, vibrant, and unapologetically free. Above the doorway, he hung a simple sign, "Bloom and Rise." Adrien brought his spirit into the venture. He transformed the evenings into something beyond commerce. When daylight faded and the last bouquet was sold, he would move the tables aside, set up his guitar, and invite friends, musicians, and strangers from the street to play. The shop became a sanctuary where music and flowers mingled, where laughter echoed against the walls that once carried silence. Customers returned not only for blossoms, but for the warmth of belonging, for a space where difference was celebrated, not condemned. Word spread quickly. Couples came to buy flowers that symbolized their stories. Artists performed in the glow of candlelight. The shop became more than a business, it became a beacon. People whispered about the Carter brothers, cast aside by their family, now cultivating beauty and song from nothing. The store carried the air of resilience, its petals and cords weaving together a new kind of legacy. Meanwhile, across town, the old empire of Carter Floral began to wither. Those who had laughed at Elliot and Adrian struggled to keep the chain alive. Their rigid designs felt outdated. Their staff dwindled. Their accounts bled into debt. Gossip filled the markets. The Carters are collapsing. Their wealth is slipping away. Creditors circled. Banks tightened their grip. And slowly, the once proud family name became a cautionary tale. Elliot and Adrian never gloated publicly, though they heard every whisper. They poured their energy back into the shop, pruning the roots of their small kingdom, nurturing its growth with patience. Each bouquet handed to a customer carried more than fragrance. It carried defiance, dignity, and memory. Each song played at dusk reminded them of the nights they had survived in the van, singing only to keep the cold from breaking them. Their golden secret remained hidden. The van still parked quietly, its rust a mask no one questioned. To the outside world, their success appeared miraculous, as if two men had conjured beauty out of thin air. But beneath it all, they knew it was not the gold alone that gave them strength. It was their decision to transform betrayal into creation, to build not in the image of those who had scorned them, but in the image of who they truly were. As the shop flourished, Elliot often paused by the window, watching couples walk past with flowers in their arms and joy on their faces. He realized the business was no longer just survival, it was testimony. A reminder that sometimes the harshest rejections plant the seeds of the most remarkable gardens. And in those quiet reflections, he understood the lesson buried beneath every petal and every chord. True growth does not come from inherited empires or gilded legacies. It comes from the courage to create beauty in the very place where others left only ashes. Years after the funeral that cast them out, the Carter brothers stood in a shop that pulsed with life. Bloom and Rise had become more than a florist's corner. It was a landmark, a place where flowers spoke in colors and music lifted weary spirits. On weekends, the rooms overflowed with laughter, music, and voices unafraid to be themselves. Elliot and Adrian had turned exile into empire, though it looked nothing like the cold halls of their father's mansion. One morning, the bell above the door jingled, but the sound did not carry the usual cheer. Two figures entered, their clothes frayed, their faces lined with desperation. It was their uncle and aunt, the very ones who had mocked them with cruel laughter, the ones who had insisted that men like them had no right to carry the Carter name. They no longer looked powerful. The suits once pressed and sharp now hung loose, their jewelry pawned, their eyes hollow. The uncle's voice cracked with a humility that had never touched him before. "We have nothing left. The bank has taken the house. Carter Floral is gone. Please let us stay. Let us work. We have nowhere else." His wife clutched his sleeve, her eyes darting around the shop filled with color, with warmth, with all that had bloomed from what she once scorned. Elliot stepped forward, calm, his composure the very opposite of their frenzy. He reached for a bouquet of white flowers, wrapped in paper soft as parchment, and placed it gently into their hands. "Do you remember," he said softly, "when you gave us a rusted van and called it our worth?" His gaze held theirs, steady, unwavering. "It turns out you gave us a treasure, not because of gold, not even because of what we built with it. The real gift was the chance to live free, to love without shame, to create something that could not be mocked away." Adrien, standing at the counter, adjusted the new sign he had hung only days before. It read in bold letters, "Golden Van, where rust turns into bloom." Behind him, the hum of voices rose as friends and customers gathered for an evening exhibition, a celebration of art and identity. The shop had become a gallery, a performance space, a safe haven for the community they once feared would destroy them. Now it was the foundation of their strength. The uncle and aunt stood silent, clutching the bouquet as if it were heavier than stone. No words could undo the years of cruelty. No plea could erase what they had stolen. All they could do was stand in the warmth of what their rejection had unknowingly created. Later that night, after the lights dimmed and the music faded, Elliot and Adrian returned to the van that still sat quietly in the alley behind the shop. Its body was scarred, its panels patched, but it had never been discarded. Inside the glove compartment, tucked beneath an envelope yellowed with time, they found their father's handwriting sealed in wax. Their hands trembled as they opened it. The letter read, "My sons, you have found the gold, but it was never meant to be the true inheritance. Wealth is only a tool. The real gift I leave you is the courage to live as yourselves, unashamed, unbroken. You are my legacy. Not the business, not the mansion, only you." Tears welled in their eyes as the words settled deep, filling the silence with a love that reached across years and loss. The letter did not erase the pain, but it transformed it, turning wounds into proof that survival had meaning. Elliot folded the paper carefully, as if holding the last piece of their father's touch. Adrien placed his hand over his brother's, their bond unspoken yet unbreakable. Together they understood revenge had never been the real ending. The true victory was freedom, the life they had built from ashes, and the legacy of love their father had trusted them to carry. And as they closed the van's door one last time, the lesson rang clear. What the world laughs at today may hold tomorrow's greatest power. Rust can cover gold, cruelty can mask love, but truth always reveals itself in time. So now I ask you, if you were in Elliot and Adrian's place, standing before the very family who once mocked you, would you forgive them, or would you let them taste the full weight of their ruin? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if stories like this move you, don't forget to subscribe to Heart Stories, where every tale reminds us that even in rejection, there is a seed of redemption waiting to bloom.